Alrighty, good morning, Mr. Jenkins.
Good morning, TJ.
So I'm just here to ask you a couple questions. What do you like most about teaching a lit and film class?
There are movies that I've watched many times over, and they still fill me with joy when I watch them. And you can watch them over and over again and get new things. And I like being able to show that to students. I like being able to get excited about watching a film, even though I've shown it multiple times, and I like trying to infect others with that excitement.
Alrighty. What makes the filmmaking process so different from other art forms?
What kind of art forms are you talking about?
Theater, music, writing.
Well, I mean, as opposed to writing and perhaps painting and sculpting, it's certainly more collaborative. I think one of the things that you're playing with as far as film goes is you're dealing with photography, which is capturing images, but you are, in a sense, manipulating your audience through a variety of techniques. So we're reading an essay in my philosophy class that's called On Photography that talks about the ideas that photographs create almost like an alternate world of reality. And in many ways that world serves as a reality on top of the reality that we already have. For film, what we have is that you're literally creating an entirely different world. And that's true of novels, I suppose, where you create an entirely different world that somebody can immerse themselves in. But as opposed to a book where you're using the imagination, in a film that the sensory organs are much more involved in, say, your imagination. So you have sound, you have visuals. I'm sure at some point they'll figure out a way to put smell, in theaters, to work that out. I've read about a couple of films that actually played around with the idea of using smells within a theater. So it's much more sensory engagement than probably any other film.
How might information from a video and film production class help students in the 21st century workforce?
One of the things that I think that people could use in a very basic way is if you learn how to do editing at a real basic level, and you can compose 2 to 3 minute videos in a relatively short amount of time. There are so many companies out there with the internet that are using that for a marketing technique, and videos can go viral so much more quickly that it's a form of advertising that really has taken off in the last 15 years, especially with social media. So I think that a person who has those basic skills, even if that's not what they want to pursue as a full-time profession, if they're working at a company and they say, I've got these skills and I can do this, that gives them an opportunity to change what they can do, because almost any business, I suppose, is going to want to have that type of marketing out there. It is a different type of communication to be able to use video and sound together. So that would probably be, as far as an economic reason, that's probably the most useful, I think.
How has filmmaking impacted you, or films in general?
How has filmmaking impacted me, or films?
Films.
Like watching films?
Yeah.
Alright, this is going to sound stupid, but there are times in my life where something happens, and this is probably true of books as well. Something happens and the immediate first thing that pops in your mind is a line from the film. And it is the idea that somebody has anticipated a situation or reaction and created something that's so very human that it's applicable in lots of different ways. And so somebody sort of imagined that. I think that films also give us a way to discuss things that are going on in the world, as far as stories go, at least good films will, and they give us a way to imagine, let's just call it reality re-scrambled. Let's take the elements of reality and scramble them into a story. So if you have something like Inception, for instance, I don't know that anybody really thinks that we're living on 4 levels of dreams or that technology is out there, but there are certainly discussions in that movie about what it means to have subconscious fear and guilt buried down, below multiple levels, that the dream part becomes a metaphor to talk about that. So in that way, dealing with subconscious guilt is something that you can think about in a metaphorical way in that story. So really good movies have, as I said before, multiple layers of meaning that you unpack. And like good novels, you approach them at different points in your life, and whatever you're going through in your life, it resonates with you in a different way, a different feeling. I just watched Taxi Driver again. because Joker was coming out and I wanted to watch it. And I remember seeing it at 20 years old and viewing it differently than I do now, like 20 years later. Just because, you know, I have different experiences and I can relate to it in different ways. And I think that good films bring that humanity out. You know, mediocre films, you watch them once, you get tired of watching them, you get tired of watching the genre, but good films, you can watch them over and over again, and they tell you new things or give you new things to think about in life.
All right, and then just one more question.
Sure.
This fun one. Favorite film or favorite director if you don't have a favorite?
Oh, wow. I mean, I always find this a really hard question because I have so many favorite films and favorite directors. I will say I often play a game with my friends and my wife. Like when we go to theaters and we watch the trailers, right? And it's like, would you or wouldn't you go see it, right? And for me, you know, anytime Quentin Tarantino or Christopher Nolan comes up on the screen, like I'm going to go watch that movie regardless, and I'm going to go see it in the theater, and I'm not gonna miss the chance to see it in the theater because I respect their filmmaking. And even if I don't know what the film is about, that's fine. As far as favorite films go, I get on a streak where it's like there's a film that all I can think about. So when I watched Arrival a couple of years ago, like it was all I could think about for a long time. It's still a really, really good movie. I think films like the Star Wars franchise are interesting because they connect with my generation at a young level, but they're not my favorite movies. It's such a hard question because I have so many films that I like for different reasons. But the one film that I talk about that's really weird and it's kind of obscure, and I keep coming back to it because I sometimes watch it when I'm in a weird mood, and it gives me something to think about. Is that there's a 1991 film called Falling Down with Joel Schumacher.
It's is that what's this? Who's starring in it? It's,
Michael Douglas.
Yeah, Michael
Douglas. And it's weird. Like I mean, it's when you meet somebody who really likes that movie, there's an appreciation for it because it's a kind of movie. This happens a lot with movies where people will think you're weird because you like it, and I probably would never really show it in class because the scene with the racist man gets killed is sort of it's visually overwhelming in a way that's can be really hard for students to take, I think, without a lot of context. And there's a lot of ambiguity in the character. So like when he kills the racist character, it's like you kind of want to cheer for him, but he's also not the hero in the film, so that's a challenge. But I noticed a couple of years, or I saw an article recently about that, and it was talking about that film in context of current American politics. And it was interesting that that film was from around the same time that Boys in the Hood was filmed in the same neighborhood. And it's the idea that that guy's not really a hero, and it provides something complex with like a lot of different ideas to talk about. So it's like you can watch it, you can read things about it that'll let you see it in different ways. So I don't know that it's my favorite film, but I usually call that like my favorite film that nobody's really watched or that like I wouldn't show in class. I'm a huge fan of Tarantino films. I saw Pulp Fiction in the theater and walked out and I was just like, I got no idea what's going on here. But I watched it again and again, and I think that he's really transformed the way that film has told stories. I mean, I'm a huge fan of like old films. Like I think that Modern Times bears worth watching again, even if it's not really exciting. And I really get excited every time the AMC, excuse me, not the AMC, but like the TCM comes out with their old classics. You know, I'm a really big fan of seeing old movies that I haven't seen or have never seen in a theater. So I went to go see Treasure of Sierra Madre, which is really, really good. Went to go see, what was the last one I saw? I can't remember. We went to go see Bonnie and Clyde in the theater. So it's always hard for me to pin down what my one favorite is because there's so many that I like for so many different reasons.
Well, I have a deep love for film. I'm a self-confessed pop culture junkie, so it's nice having a venue where I get to share that love for film with other people. I also think that literature and English classes in general get a bad rep because kids go, well, it's boring to read, I don't want to do that. And I think having a film class where you're using the same strategies of analysis for motion pictures that you use when analyzing literature helps them realize that there are more connections between the two and maybe makes the other English classes a bit more interesting as well.
What skills do students learn from lit and film classes?
Well, as I just said, they really do increase some of the skills they already have, but put them into a different venue or a different mode. So I spend a lot of time talking about how studying literature or studying film is using the exact same strategies as studying literature, kind of like reading in the dark. And so they are still learning how to analyze characterization. They're still learning how to deal with themes and motifs, but now they're looking at how lighting affects that, how costume choices add to that, how dramatic irony can work on the screen versus just on the page. This also gives them a better understanding of how all of that is put together, plus music, plus lighting, plus costumes, plus directing, plus acting. How many different people are involved in making a film a success, whereas literature is just one.
Where do you see filmmaking going in the future, in the 21st century?
Oh my goodness. Well, we're almost 22nd century at this point. Where do I see it going? It's a difficult question. I think we have a lot of weight that has been put on CGI. I mean, just yesterday it broke that they're attempting to cast a movie with James Dean, an entirely CGI James Dean. He died years ago, and here we are trying to put him in another movie. Not as a cameo, but as a full character. And so I think there is that element of what can we do with technology and with CGI to further advance filmmaking. My fear, though, is that that's going to take us away from some of the classic strategies and skills that still last. Like the stop motion animation is classic and wonderful.
Like practical effects.
Right. But I do think we will see a continued increase in the role technology and computer-generated imagery plays on filmmaking.
One tip you would give any beginner filmmaker, or any beginner?
Watch everything.
What?
I think a lot of student filmmakers get hung up on, I want to just watch the works of the directors that inspire me. So I'm going to watch every Quentin Tarantino movie ever made because I want to be the next Quentin Tarantino. But that does a disservice to all of the filmmakers who inspired Quentin Tarantino. So you need to watch all different genres, all different films, old and new, black and white, silent, animated. You need to broaden your knowledge of film. And it can't just be I don't want to watch a war movie because I don't like war movies, because then you're missing out on an entire genre that is significant moving forward. So a lot of the times with my students, I get stuck with, I don't want to watch that, it's old. And that pushback. As long as you can avoid that, you can get over that and see things that you haven't seen before and watch more, you'll get a better understanding of how to make film.
All right. Last question. You can answer this both ways. What is a film that's heavily impacted you, or a filmmaker that's heavily impacted you? I know this is a hard.
That is such a hard question. For me, it's more films than the filmmakers. Although in teaching lit and film, I've definitely grown in my appreciation of the art that's needed to be a successful filmmaker. A film that's had
or it could be a couple, like.
Well, I was going to say yes. I mean, picking a film that has had an impact on my life is always complicated. My favorite film of all time is The Princess Bride. The Princess Bride, I have seen into the triple digits. I can recite the movie backwards and forwards. That is one of the first movies that I remember my father bringing home from Blockbuster, and we watched as a family. And that is such a perfect mix of so many different genres that I find I relate to the humor, I relate to the romance, I relate to the drama and the tragedy and the loss, the adventure of it, and then of course it's all tied up in a nice happy ending in both the internal story of Buttercup and Wesley and the external story of the grandfather and the grandson. That shaped me, I think, a lot. I also love Mel Brooks movies. And Mel Brooks' humor, as crazy and over the top sometimes as it can be and not PC, but it's quick and it's fast and it's witty. And that has helped me figure out a lot of my own sense of humor and a lot of what I look for and respect in other people, plus the ability to gallows humor, to kind of laugh in the worst situations and still find a way to get through them. Those are big for me.
The thing I like most about teaching a lit and film class is that I get to work with students who don't necessarily plug in a traditional English classroom. I have always been, I was always a reader. Reading came easy to me, it was enjoyable to me, I read for pleasure, but a lot of my students didn't. A lot of my students don't. And one of the things that I noticed as I kind of got to know them and talked with them was they don't read for pleasure, in part because they don't make that leap from black ink on a page to imagination. They don't really see the character in their mind. They don't hear what the character sounds like. They don't know what the character's wearing. And so they don't connect with the story. And there's some really good stories out there that people are missing. And so what I realized was that if I could take a medium that was much more familiar, like film, and teach students how to use their imagination, how to look at like, let's take this print text and we'll talk about why this character, what do you think this character is wearing? What do you think this character sounds like? What do they look like? Well, then let's look at a couple different film versions of it. That's kind of a fun thing to do. Like take Shakespeare, because there's tons of different versions of everything he did. And let's look at why Lawrence Fishburne's Othello looks so different from, say, Orson Welles. And what is if they say the exact same words, why do they look so different? Why do they deliver their lines so differently? Why is the set so different? And what it does is it gives you an engaging way to discuss directorial choices. And why did this director choose to do this versus that director who chose to do something completely different? And all of a sudden, students start to realize that that's not what Othello looked like. Nobody knows what Othello looked like. The story is hundreds of years old because it's older than the Shakespearean version. But what it teaches students is that that's a version, and their version is as valid as any of the rest of them. And then when we go back to a print text, all of a sudden they're able to engage with that print text in a way that they never did before. So that's kind of a long answer to a short question, but I really do feel like there's a lot of times where students fall through the cracks because they're not engaging with print text the way we used to. Maybe there was a time in our history when everybody sat down and read for pleasure. I don't know that there was, but for me, it's a way to connect with the world that a lot of times the students never realized was possible.
With that said, because it's interesting you say that, because our generation I would consider is a very visual generation, right? Social media, YouTube, we're very visual learners, right? And how would you say that that's, film and video will impact, impact learning in the 21st century, right? Impact, careers in the 21st century.
Well, I think it's important to realize that you can't escape video. You can't escape film. I mean, it's obviously there's films, there's TV series, and all this other kind of stuff, but there's also advertising, and it all comes down to manipulation. And you're always trying to manipulate an audience, and that's nothing new. I mean, storytellers have always tried to do that, whether it's told orally or whether it's you want to get that jump from your audience, or whether whether it's written out and on a page, you're trying to manipulate your audience. I think it's important to be able to. I think it's important to study film in order to understand how you're being manipulated. What is this storyteller trying to do to? For example, take politics or take any advertisement. Politics seems to have more far-reaching ramifications. Why is this commercial structured the way it is? What is this storyteller? How is the storyteller trying to manipulate me beyond just whether I agree with this person or not? I think it's interesting how like on political commercials, a lot of times your candidate, they'll often reference, the other guys who are always, bad, whatever. And when they show pictures of them, they're always caught at inopportune times, like they got their driver's license photo or something. And that's not an accident. The whole thing is to engage with the viewers on an emotional level. And they're subtle techniques, but they are grounded in psychology and they work really well. I think it's important to understand that.
With that, what would you say would be the hardest part of filmmaking? Just if you can pick one thing like that.
Well, it depends on. Oh wow, that's a big question. Because there's so many different parts of the filmmaking process. I mean, there is finding a story, which sometimes is the hardest thing, I guess, or finding the right actor, or understanding how to get the right performance from the actor. But ultimately, I think the biggest concern, assuming you have a story to tell, and we all have stories to tell, I think the biggest thought process has to be in terms of the audience. What do I want my audience to get from this? What do I want them to think about this? How do I want to challenge them? Or, what is the impact I want this story to have? And then you have to kind of reverse engineer it, where you say, well, okay, if this is what I want my audience to think or to feel, like a political ad, I want you to vote for my candidate. If this is what I want the audience to think or feel, then I've got to step back and into my bag of tricks. And think about the techniques that I can use to manipulate my audience in that direction. And there's a lot of really good techniques that are available.
What skills do students learn from filmmaking?
Well, I think with when you study writing, when you study literature, one of the big questions is always, what was the author's intention? Or what are the techniques the author, why is this simile here? Why does the author use this particular literary device? And in filmmaking, it's a lot the same way. So, all right, I'm kind of getting away from your question on it. What's the hardest thing for students?
What skills do students learn?
Skills do they learn? They learn. I think one of the most important skills that students learn is the ability to put themselves in another person's shoes, specifically their audience's shoes, and then to think in terms of message. I mean, that's an important life skill. Even something as basic as, Mom and Dad, I want to be able to go over here on Friday evening. Can I do that? Well, you got to be able to think, what kind of argument is going to convince my mom or dad to let me do that, right? Or, as you get older and you have, I think I deserve a raise. Well, why do you deserve a raise? Well, let me back up. This argumentation is huge. And this is really a form of argumentation. I'm persuading you to think and feel a certain way. We already talked about political ads and things like that, but I think it's, for the ability to put yourself in your audience's shoes and consider how to manipulate them, what would make them think this, what would make them feel this, and then to put in place the building blocks that would lead them in that direction. It's huge.
What would you say to those that don't think filmmaking is a legitimate career? It should be something to strive for, or a lot of people think of it as a backup, but not,
Right. Well, and I don't, I've got a lot of students, former students who are doing film professionally at all kinds of different aspects of the process, but I don't expect my students to do that. What I do want them to think of, what I do want them to leave with is the ability to think critically about text. And fundamentally that's the basis of any English class. I'm okay if they don't study film, but if they can critically break down a text, whether it's a video or a movie or a print text, that to me is successful, because ultimately, you know, I want students to ask questions. I don't want my students to accept the things that they're presented with blindly. You know, look and see why is it that you believe what you believe? Why is it that you feel what you feel from this? And I just think that just gives you a whole other level of understanding of and appreciation of. It's a level of sophistication that that I think helps you to become a better, more informed citizen. You know, when you come down to it, I think it's huge. So whether they study film or not, I mean, there's so much in life that they're being presented with that they've got to think of in the same kinds of terms that we use when we break down a film. That I think that's a valuable skill set.
Last one. Favorite film and why?
You might as well ask me my favorite child. Yeah.
Or do you have like because I know this, it could be like a top, just a couple that are like, these are it.
I would do better to tell you favorite directors. I know I'm kind of weaseling out, I feel like, but I think my favorite directors, I think, if I were to go with 3 favorite directors, that's even hard. But I think Hitchcock, I'd have to go with Hitchcock as one, because so much of what we see in film is directly attributable to to innovations that he made. The length of feature films is attributable to Hitchcock.